Konnichiwa everyone. Today we're going to do something kind of fun. I acquired over the weekend this really cool little ball peen hammerhead. I also got a hold of some beautiful sticks of padauk. This is just a very nice tropical hardwood. We're going to use this to make just a stupid simple little handle for this guy. So the first order of business in making a handle is you have to decide how long you want this thing to be. Since this is a tiny hammer, it really doesn't need to be, doesn't need to be as long as a sword, but you don't want it to be too short either. I usually say get a length that works for you. In this case, I'm just going to say that long. Next order of business that we're going to do is we're just going to trim this down to size. I'm not actually going to shape this handle in any specific way. I kind of prefer my hammer handles to be a little squared off. What I usually do is you simply take the head and you sight down on your stock to see how much you're going to have to remove. As you can see, we're pretty squared up on the end pieces here. We're going to have to plane down this side and that side, which is this end. We're going to taper it sort of, if you were looking at a pinpoint, something going out like this. So seeing as this is just a very quick and dirty way to do this, once you've got it planed down, I didn't even bother planing the square. I'm just going to trim it up a bit with a knife, just take some nice cuts on both sides. The Duke has this weird sort of cologne scent to it as well. It's almost like if your granddad left a bottle of cologne to you in his will that he bought back in 1910 or whatever. But typically what I do in these cases is I just make sure that I've got one side that's sort of set. So you're only going to be working from one edge instead of having to work both when it comes to these sides. If this is off just a bit, that's fine. This is a handle for a smashing device. This is not meant to be a work of art. This should just be as practical as you can make it. If you sight down that, you can see where there's some light. We're still just a tad tight on the corners there, so we're just going to trim those up with our handy dandy knife. Charging blindly forward because we are so brave. Charging blindly forward to fall into our graves. Alright, so some progress has been made. We're fairly in line with the handle, which is good. We're going to make a little slit going right down the middle here. So you put the strain relief down here after you've made the cut for your wedge. And the reason you put the hole down here is because it takes a lot of the strain off of the wood down in this section of the handle. So you don't run the risk of getting splitting as you're driving your wedge in place. So for a wedge, I've got a little scrap piece of rosewood here. Should look pretty cool with that padauk. It's going to be about there. Again, this is not a precise science. This is just whatever each individual situation calls for. So yeah, looking pretty good on that. When you're cutting your wedge, the most effective thing you can do is actually to round out the corners just a tad so you don't run the risk of just splintering out or losing your wedge when you're doing it. Pretty far in there just with hand pressure. As you can see, I can get it on and off with ease, which is good. And we got some space we got to go still, which means I can drive the rest home with a hammer. This is the same method that you use to hang an axe. Rather than actually putting the hammerhead on your bench and then driving the handle into it like a pile driver, if you simply get it mounted with hand pressure, as you can see, it's kind of holding itself there. Take your local encouragement device. So instead of having it on your bench, you simply hold it and let it float slightly and strike the end of the handle. What that does is it actually drives this into the handle. So we've also closed up our relief cut just a bit, so I'm just going to open it up with the saw. Next up is a generous helping of your favorite adhesive. There we go. So once you got it started, you can just drive it home. So just as a little bit of added insurance, instead of just having glue on the wedge, I'm actually just going to saturate this a bit. We've got a good fit, but you just don't want this thing flying off when you're in mid-swing, provided you're fighting an appropriate barbarian horde, or if you're just trying to drive a nail where it needs to be. Take a wet washcloth or a wet tablecloth or whatever you want to with some water in it, and just soak the living daylights out of this with the glue. It'll help the glue run into all the little crevices inside the wood that may be opened up. Now, an interesting thing about Titebond is that this stuff actually maintains a very, very high very high adhesive ratio even when it's wet. You could probably thin it down to maybe 50% or so and still maintain some good, adhesion, I guess. So you get rid of the excess, you just take your knife, and I like to just trim up the top here just a tad. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want this nicking something whenever you're trying to be precise. Well, she ain't pretty, but she'll get the job done, and that's kind of what matters in the end. So they ain't got to be pretty, but they do need to be practical. So like I said before, this is just a super easy way to make a hammer handle. There's no right or wrong way to do it. There are ways that work a little better though. Hopefully you learned something through this. I know that I'm going to enjoy using this little guy. Also, I noticed that the channel has gotten a lot of new subscribers lately. To that, I say thank you. Hope you guys have an awesome day. Arigato gozaimasu. Sayonara.